While inside of the pumpkin house by myself, waiting for everyone else to come inside, I didn't have time to process what was happening before the fireplace against the wall ignited and gave me a place where I could approach in the darkness. While standing there, the voice around my neck spoke. "Approach the chair by the fire," the little imp said, and with some reluctance, I approached the fire. My little imp hasn't guided me astray yet. A little guide and protector, a gift from my father, and even if I didn't want the gift, I couldn't get rid of it. Trying to take it off of myself would only have the imp's bottle appear on my person again. And now I always had a voice and a guide to assist me in life. The little girl's voice to guide me through the problems in life. In front of the fire and in a chair facing the fire, a woman with dark hair and dark clothes. A woman who lifted up a mirror to turn my way and to see me, where I could see her pale face looking back at me as she spoke up. "That's close enough, Hell Walker. I see you enter my house alone. Your friends will join us soon, but before they enter, I have a story for you," she said before I asked. "Why won't you wait for them to join us? Isn't the point of these stories to be shared with everyone in the group?" I asked her as she smirked and she explained. "Not this story. It is meant just for you. Don't worry, they'll join us at the right time. The magician will see to it." She nodded to the portrait above the fire, a portrait of a man in red robes and a scroll pointing directly above, and an infinity halo above his head, and his left hand pointing down on the ground, and with one finger. The magician, the arcana of the pumpkin house. So, little Miss Mercy Love, listen to the story of Nani Woodcarver, the story of my family, and the home we built here that you are exploring now, she said, as she began to tell me the final backstory of this year's pumpkin house. And as she explained, I understood why I was told this story alone. There was once a butcher who loved his wife very much, so much so that he saved every spare coin he could to build her a home. They were happy to live their lives together, but even as they lived their lives together, there was more that they wanted. They wanted children. They couldn't have any children, no matter how hard they tried, nor how much they loved each other. They couldn't adopt because the couple was too poor to be allowed to adopt. So Sarah, the wife, convinced Barnabas, her husband, to bring her books from the witches in the cabin. And Barnabas, in love with Sarah, stole the books without a second thought, and he continued his work in the butchery. As Sarah learned the magic in the witches' books, she had another request for her husband. She found three different magical means of making children, and the first way, the easiest way, would require some of the spare meat, bone, blood, organs, and twine from the butchery. Sarah gave her husband a list of different parts he needed to collect from the butchery. It included flesh from lambs, goats, and cows. It required organs from young animals, skin taken from a human infant, blood from the animals, butcher twine from the shop mixed with Barnabas's sweat, and most important of all, a newborn human heart. Day by day, Barnabas brought each piece of Sarah's list to her as she worked on her first child. The final parts, the most important and hardest to get, Barnabas obtained by digging into the town's frozen graveyard, where Barnabas dug into the ground, hoping the cold would keep the bodies preserved long enough for him to dig up. Even with the infant mortality rate being so high in that day and age, it was hard to find a decent infant body. Still, even with Barnabas's most delicate efforts, there were cuts in the skin, places where the skin was too thin, places where the skin was too thick, places where the skin was cut where it wasn't meant to be cut. Skinning an animal was easier than skinning an infant small enough to fit in his hand. And from inside of the chest cavity, Barnabas removed the dead child's frozen heart, which he packed with snow to keep it fresh, as he wrapped it in the child's skin, along with more snow, as he brought it home to Sarah. There she berated her husband for cutting the skin, but she promised that she would fix it as she went to work. Carefully laying the skin down, tying it together with butcher twine, and placing the many bones, muscles, and organs where they belonged, sewing them together piece by piece, and despite even her best effort, the organs, the muscle, and the bones all came from different creatures. So even if they had similarities, they didn't always bind together cleanly. Still, Shara shaped the child that she always dreamed of. A handsome boy whose face was carefully shaped to resemble Barnabas. The body looked human, handsome, even normal as she sewed up the last stitch with hidden stitches using the butcher twine. When finished, she brought a plate of freshly cooked beef, the same beef that made up most of his body, and she let the aroma fill the boy's mouth and nose. And as the heavenly aroma filled him, he took his first breath, and Wyron Woodcutter was born. Or maybe animate was a better word for what happened to him, since he wasn't born and he was made out of many different parts. Still, Wyron ate voraciously that night, and the night after that, and the night after that. Wyron grew quickly, like most young children do. Unlike most children, though, he did not slow down. Before his first birthday, he was as tall as his father. By his second, he was nearly as tall as the ceiling before he finally stopped growing. It was no wonder the others of the village called Wyron a Genu when they saw him. Genu were giants, after all. They were always hungry, like Wyron was, and they were hideous, like Wyron was. Even with his parents' best efforts, he did not look normal. His skin sagged in some places, and it was too tight in others. His legs weren't the same length, so he limped everywhere. His mouth grew many different teeth, some sharp like a fox's, others flat like a cow, and others still all too human. And the greatest difficulty of raising Wyron was his appetite. He would eat nearly anything he could. Flesh, bone, blood, bile, stone, wood, weeds, vegetables, garbage, and even metal. He was often hungry, and he was often willful when his parents asked him to behave. At the age of 2, he didn't understand why he couldn't play with the other children in the village. He didn't understand why he could only eat away from everyone, and he didn't understand why everyone stared at him. As he grew older, though, his parents' frustrations grew into resentment. The child of their dreams was nothing like Wyron. Barnabas imagined a son who could take up his trade as he grew older, someone he could raise and teach how to be a man, someone who would look him in the eye and tell him that he loved him. Wyron could not handle his father's tools with his hands too large and his balance too weak, his steps like a giraffe with a limp. At his age, Wyron did not speak with words, and every time Barnabas looked Wyron in the eyes, he was disgusted by what he saw in those cow-like eyes. Even the simple joy of having something in common with his son was denied to Barnabas. The way Wyron smiled was too much like the lamb's head he saw in his butcher shop every day. The way he laughed reminded him of the calls of a goat made before it lost its head, and even the way Wyron chewed reminded Barnabas of the beasts he slaughtered every day, and his son was expensive to care for. So the husband and the wife discussed, and while they both had resentment for their abomination of a son, they did not want to harm their son. Not at first. Not until the first time Wyron ran away from home. It took them 3 days to find him, and when he was found, it was because he had killed a hunter in the woods. A hunter mistook Wyron for a monster and fired 3 bullets at his heart, all of the bullets shattering against his cold heart, so Wyron did not die, and he tore off the hunter's arms and fed on his flesh, waiting for his parents to find him. Now, as Barnabas and Sarah understood that Wyron was a danger to others and himself if he kept running away, they locked him in the house's basement, where he would be chained to the wall, and occasionally they tried to kill him, an unexpected side effect of their dark magic that brought Wyron to life. They couldn't kill him. They cut open his chest with an axe, and were able to remove every organ inside, except Wyron's heart, which was so cold that they couldn't touch it. Metal, wood, stone, flesh, cloth, or even fire all froze and shattered when it touched Wyron's frozen heart. Even with his stomach removed, Wyron did not starve, even if he hungered. They tried burning his body in the stone basement, but even as his flesh turned to ash and his bones were shattered and scattered, the heart remained frozen, and he slowly grew around his heart again. Even with his head removed, Wyron still stared at them. Apparently the only organ he needed to live was his frozen heart, and they could not destroy the heart. So they kept Wyron locked up in their basement, sometimes trying to kill him again, but otherwise they pretended that their first son just did not exist. And with every escape attempt, they learned how to keep him contained better. They learned how to break his arms and legs in such a way that they healed crooked, unable to support his weight. They learned how to nail his jaws closed so he couldn't chew on the chains that kept him imprisoned. They learned how to nail his limbs to the floor so he would be kept in agony, unable to escape, nailing parts of his body together as it healed in crooked ways around his frozen heart. And he is still in the basement to this day, forever hungry, never starving, still trying to escape, never managing to break his chains. The only thing he has to eat down there is himself, feeding on himself, healing from himself, only his cold heart to keep him company as he waits down there, waiting for someone foolish enough to head into the basement, close enough for him to eat. The woodcarvers decided that the Genu in their basement was not what they wanted in a child. They decided to try a different spell. They wanted a child that was beautiful, but a lot more delicate than the way that Wyron turned out. So they sought out something that was a lot more delicate and a lot more beautiful than meat from a butchery. The next child they made out of fresh winter snow, carefully shaping her body out of snow, her heart carved out of the chest, and the first heart they tried to place inside of the snow body's chest melted the body. It was too delicate to hold a heart made with blood or flesh. So instead they tried something more delicate, making the heart out of glass as they made a second body. The heart was too sensitive though, shattering when it came in contact with the snow, so the woodcarvers made a third body that same night, their hands red and freezing from the snow that they finally made a heart for their new child, a heart carved out of the frozen pond, a heart of ice in the body of snow. A body of a young woman was carved by them both, and when it was complete, they waited until the full moon revealed the body, and then the woodcarver's second child, Vera, Sat up in the cold winter night. Vera was well loved by her parents and by her village peers. She was beautiful, ethereal, and she could sing with a voice like a winter breeze. Although, because she was made from snow, she could not touch anything that could cause her to melt. She couldn't approach any fire for fear that she would melt within minutes. Her room in the house always had the windows open to the freezing night air. She couldn't even hug her parents for long because even touching her parents caused her to melt. And when she melted, she needed to reshape what was left of her body in the cold to replace what she had lost. Although every time she melted and reshaped herself, there was less and less of herself left over, having her shorter and smaller every time she touched anyone, anytime she got too close to a fire, or just by the day being too warm. And unlike how Wyron could enjoy many foods, and even things that were not food, Vera was too delicate to eat. All food was too hot for her to eat. Even water would cause her to melt, so she couldn't eat with her parents. She couldn't be in the same room as her parents, unless her parents were willing to freeze. She couldn't even see spring dawn upon her village, because the spring would cause her to melt and perish. She would never fall in love, because her heart was feared it would melt. She would never marry, because by the time spring came, she would leave her husband a widower. And of course, she could never have children. Her body was too cold to grow a child, even if she could survive a consummation. So now Sarah and Barnabas now had a different problem with their second child. The child that they loved more than anything, who was the most beautiful thing in the world to them, and who would perish so quickly it would be like she was never there, leaving so much pain in their hearts. So they agreed to keep themselves from ever hurting again. They insulated Vera's room, covering the windows to keep spring's light from entering. They kept the room colder than a winter storm, and they kept Vera away from anything that could possibly cause her to melt. No food, no water, no pets, no visitors. The only thing that would be let into her room would be books and art supplies for her to draw on easels brought into her room. Vera remained alone in her room, kept away from the light, kept away from warmth, kept away from company, out of fear that she would lose more of herself, only let out of her room during winter nights, and even then she would be well protected by her parents. And as much as Sarah loved Vera, she was not what Sarah dreamed of as a daughter. Vera could not be dressed up. Vera could not be hugged. Vera could not grow up. Vera could not even watch the dawn with her mother. In trying to avoid making an immortal monster like Wyron, they created a child who was far too delicate to touch. A child who sang, a child who stared, a child who judged them with her cold expression, a reminder of how their second child failed them just as badly as their first child, so they kept her locked away in her room. They tell themselves it's for Vera's protection, never bothering to ask her what she wanted. Vera remains in her room to this very night, alone, cold, and sometimes singing when she no longer wants to be alone. And the woodcarvers with two failed children decided to try again. They decided their newest child would never judge them, never speak a harsh word to them, never make them feel guilty with song nor hunger. A child they could hold and who could hold them back. Something they could dress up and show off, but never grow old, and unlike the Genu, or the Snow Maiden, never be a threat to others nor herself. Next they took a mannequin from the atelier, where they carefully wrapped cloth around the joints, and they gave the mannequin the most beautiful black dress Sarah owned, carefully putting the dress and the cloth skin around the mannequin until they made a body they thought was beautiful, leaving the face of the mannequin blank as they sewed their newest child a heart. This time it wasn't as hard as a frozen human heart, nor was it something as delicate as ice. The heart was made from scrap fabric sewn together in a mismatched shape as the heart was sewn into the mannequin. The heart now placed, they brought a mirror to the empty face of the mannequin, and when that was done, the mannequin came to life, grabbing the mirror, and Nani was born. It was a curious quirk of the magic that made it so Nani had a face in the reflection, but not on her own body. She could see through the reflection, she could speak through the reflection, and though no one knew how she could see through her eyeless face as well. But she could not smile, she could not eat, she could not kiss. Her parents did not care. They were happy to finally have a child they could take into their village. A child that would never talk back, a child they could dress up, a child they could care for, and who would care for them. And Nani would live with them for many years that they considered perfect. Sure, sometimes Nani would look through the mirror longer than they liked, so they'd take the mirror away for a while. Sometimes she would ask them questions they couldn't answer, like what it was like to eat or fall in love, and they would just ignore her questions, moving on with their lives. And so Nani remained with her family, never growing up, never leaving, eventually caring for her parents as they aged, and they taught her how to care for her siblings. Eventually, her parents died, and Nani remained unaging in the house, caring for her siblings, caring for her family's magics and secrets, never having a visitor, never having a guest, never having a friend. The woman in the chair finally turned to face me. She had no face, only smooth, pale skin where her features would be. "Until tonight, that is," she said before the fire went out, and she vanished, leaving her chuckling behind, just as the door opened and my friends began to enter the house.